Welcome to the Janine Bolon Show, where we share tips from around the globe as we guide practical people with their finances using money tips, increase their incomes through side businesses, and maintain their sanity by staying in their creative zone.
Hello, Janine Bolon here, and welcome to today's show, where we bring you quality content on saving your time, saving your money, and how about staying sane during these very continually changing phases of life? What do you think? The Janine Bolon Show is a syndicated program of 4 podcast shows that were combined in October of 2021. 3-Minute Money Tips, The Thriving Solopreneur, The Writer's Hour Creative Conversations, and The Practical Mystic Show were all programs that were running simultaneously from 2017 to 2021. We've now produced over 300 episodes. We've interviewed over 217 guests, and today we will be spotlighting one of the authors that is contributing to our 99 author project, Mr. Paul Hood. Now, Paul is a highly sought after speaker and consultant due to his innate ability to see through complexities and be able to explain things that are difficult and often boring subjects and he makes them understandable as well as entertaining. I mean, that's not easy to do, folks. He minces no words when he's doing this. He has a very direct approach. And one of the things that's really cool is Paul has been a father, a husband, a lawyer, a trustee, a director, a president, a trust protector, a director of planned giving, an expert witness, agent, we're going to come back to that, a professor, a judge, a juror, and a defendant. So he takes all of these myriad of roles and the crazy experiences that he has had to guide others. Welcome to the show, Paul. It's great to have you.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Janine. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, I totally love when I get an opportunity to talk to authors, because especially when they're in the financial industry, because I taught so much, like for 30 years, I taught finances. And one of the things I used to talk to people about were certain money tips. And I tell my listeners, look, we will cover some sort of a money tip in the show. And so the one that is my favorite story to tell is that I sat down, and it took me an hour, but I sat down and I figured out with math how much money using a spatula in the kitchen, because I did a lot of cooking from scratch. When you have 4 children and you're living on one income, let me tell you, you learn to really stretch a dollar. And I found out that it saved us $273 a year to use a $1 spatula to clean out everything from jelly jars to whatever, anything I used. I was dumbfounded how something so little could save and yield us so much money. So I had asked you earlier, hey, do you have one of those kind of money stories you can tell us? And you were like, I'm not going to tell you yet. I'm going to tell you on the air. So go ahead and share.
A money tip that I often pass along to people at various stages of life, whether they're students going to college or to grad school or law school or medical school or others, is the following. It is much easier to borrow money than it is to pay it back. And people look at you like, what? And I said, yes, it is easier to get a lender to give you money. It is harder to pay that loan back with interest at the stated rate with after-tax dollars. It will cost you 40 to 50% more, plus the interest, to get that back. I said, so therefore, when you borrow money, remember that it's easier to get it than it is to give it back. And remember that on the front end so you don't borrow too much or you don't borrow for the wrong reason.
And that is true wisdom. But it's so funny. Have you ever noticed it when you're talking about money and you'll come out with some of these sayings and people are like, yeah, I've heard that before, whatever, give me something new. I actually had a Wall Street Journal reporter say to me, look, our people are very savvy. They need something new. Do you have anything new? And I thought to myself, there is nothing new when it comes to money and how to save it and live debt free. You got to start with that first. So thank you for sharing what I know to be the basics of, and to say it in such a concise way.
Well, it's there's nothing there's no sex appeal to the basics. Okay.
It's true.
But what it does actually have some sex appeal is the fact that if you follow the basics, you will have money. And if you don't, if you fall for the shiny objects, the newfangled ideas, you often end up broke. And we're seeing this in the cryptocurrency market today. And you're seeing it in a number of areas where people come up with what they think are newfangled ways to make money when the old ways are the only ways. There are no shortcuts to quality. I mean, there's a whole list of topics that are timeless and adages that are timeless that just, there's no secret to it other than the fact that this is what you got to do. And if you fall for something new, it might not work, and usually doesn't work.
Yep. And we see a lot of that happening in so many different areas of our lives. But I'd love to have you talk to us about your book, though. And you are an author. You have multiple books. You've written several. And I forget how many. Can you tell me how many it is now?
9.
Yeah, I knew you were almost a double-digit author, as my kids like to say when you cross over into 10 or more. But you wrote a book that was exceptional to me for what I needed in my life, and that was Yours, Mine, and Ours. Do you mind talking to us a little bit about why you wrote that book?
Yes. When I was a practicing tax and estate planning lawyer, the most consistently challenging client was the client in the second, third, or more marriages. I had 2 clients, Janine, actually married 8 times in their lives. I actually perfected my prenuptial agreement because I drafted 4 for one of them who kept marrying younger women.
No.
The 8th and burying spouse he married when he was 82. And she was but 26.
More
and the
power
other one married 8 times and died at 64. Believe it or not, that's a lot of marrying to get in before age 64. But I did 3 prenups for him. I'm sorry, but the bottom line is that in estate planning, when you have a single relationship couple and they share the children or other descendants, the planning is very, very different than when you have people who have so-called blended or step families. And in fact, techniques that work great for single relationship couples often are disasters for the blended family couple.
And we have more of those now, right? I mean, that was something you and I were talking about. It's like, it's now common. It is now the majority to have blended families rather than single married couples, especially in the financial industry at this stage of the game.
Well, believe it or not, Janine, you're right. And the United States Census, beginning in the 2010 census, the blended family is now the most common form of family relationship. That was repeated in the 2020 census. And so therefore, Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver have given way to the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, we definitely are the Brady Bunch now. Thank you very much. And for those of you who don't understand what we're saying, don't worry about it. We're now moving on to the book part of the chapter. And that is one of the things I love about authors is I like them to come out and strut their stuff a little bit and what they know. But a lot of you are listening to this 99 Author Project because you want to know how to market your book better. And so what I do is I brought on almost 100 authors and said, hey, tell us about what works, what doesn't work, and why you did things the way you did. And so one of the things that I've come to find out with a lot of folks that are in the nonfiction industry is they don't write under a pen name. They choose to write under their own name. But Paul, you have quite a story about your name, because on your book cover it says L and then a period and then Paul Hood. And so tell us a little bit about L.
L stands for Leonard, Leonard. And in my dad's family, Leonard is a name that has been frequently given, but never used. My paternal grandfather's name was Leonard Richard, went by Richard. He named my father, his oldest son, Leonard Paul, called him Paul. I am the oldest of three boys born within 35 months of each other. Yes, my mother and father didn't hire babysitters. They hired referees. That's what they used to say. But when I was born, I was Paul, and little Paul. And of course, on the Cajun side of my family, my maternal grandmother and her family are Cajun. In fact, my maternal great-grandmother didn't speak English. She spoke only Cajun French. And when we did something as kids that she didn't like, which was frequent, she would roll her eyes and say Anglais, because the Cajun people, of course, hate the English, because in 1760, when France ceded Canada to Great Britain after losing the French and Indian War, the British troops went up to my people in Acadia in Canada and says, you now need to swear allegiance to the King of England. They said, no, we're going to swear at the King of England. So they put my people on boats and they shipped them down out of the Great Lakes, down the Atlantic seaboard. And a lot of them landed in Virginia and then made the trek across down to southwest Louisiana. So in Cajun land, of course, the word petite is translated in French is little. But Cajun French, I was known as T. Paul, because T is short for petite. So I was T. Paul. And when my son was born, who's Paul III, I said, let's name him something else. LP, Trey, Trip. The women outvoted me. He was another Paul, although my dad was a conscientious objector and never called him Paul, always called him Trip or Trey, as long as he lived. So.
I knew that you'd have a story. And that's one of the things I love about you is your storytelling. And you and I both have forced migration stories in our history and in our background. So thank you for sharing a little bit of yours. But we're going to get back to marketing that book. And one of the things that really helps when it comes to marketing a book is your ability to do verbal storytelling as well as your written storytelling. So we understand why you wrote under the name that you do. But did you have any kind of a marketing background before you started writing your book? No, I didn't think so. I knew it was pretty much financial, and you didn't have marketing expert anywhere in the labels of your introduction. Although you said you were an agent. Now I was like, were you secret agent man? You know, I had that song going on in my head. So what did you mean by agent?
Agent, agent for entities, the legal agent for service of process. I was an agent under powers of attorney, otherwise known as agent and attorney in fact.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
In two different capacities. And actually a third form of agent, because I was an agent for some professional sports players. So
gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure, because when somebody says they're an agent, I was in a military family, so it has a very different connotation. I'm like, ooh, what kind of agent?
Right.
Okay. So, hey, talk to us a little bit about what was the most surprising thing that you ran across with the book marketing process and how you published your book?
Well, the most surprising thing I learned, Janine, when I published my first national book on business valuation with Wiley and Sons in 2010, was that publishers do no book marketing. You know, I, being a naive, guy and, sort of a subject matter expert and wonk, just assumed that the people putting the book together would actually have a plan to sell it. But that's not true. And that was my experience. So that was the biggest thing that surprised me. No marketing. Zero marketing. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize there was a sea change in the publishing industry from 1999 to 2000. And that's when vanity publishing came out. But of course, Hollywood doesn't help us authors, right? It keeps us in that naivete because, they still make it sound like, oh, this is my publisher. Like the publisher's done a lot of the marketing for you. It's funny. So say what would you change if you started marketing
your books today? Like, say you were a fresh debut author, what are some of the things that you would change or do that you didn't know about before?
Well, the first thing I would do is A, not rely on the publisher, and B, hire, learn and hire some experts who could help me actually market the book. Because I didn't know anything about it, and I've learned something over the years about it, but the learning curve is shortened greatest by, and you don't have to go, because you can spend more money on marketing than you can make in book revenues. But if you strategically and judiciously hire experts at various levels along the way, you can really enhance your book sales.
Wonderful. And so tell us what worked best for you when it came to selling your books. What were some of the things that were successes for you?
Well, appearing at conferences with boxes of books drop shipped on site, when people heard you speak, they wanted to buy your book. So immediately, and being set up to sell the book immediately, and obviously technology today makes that very easy. In the beginning, it could be a little bit of a challenge. You were taking written checks from people, but the bottom line is that personal appearances, some readings at bookstores, but not very much. My old friend, the late Dan Pointer, who was one of the self-publishing gurus of this country, I got to know Dan pretty well. And Dan used to say bookstores are lousy places to sell books. And he was right. Dan sold most of his books on parasailing and parachuting at parachute shops, believe it or not. But conferences, and today with COVID, I do a lot of podcast appearances that help move the needle on book sales.
I agree that I wrote a book on it, actually, as you know.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
a very good book, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pay you your $20 later. But yeah, so that's one of those things, right? Is that you have to shift with the time. So this is always my favorite question to ask fellow authors, and that is, what is your story of epic failure when it came to marketing your book? We all have that story. I have a $6,000 story of epic failure, of where, like, I invested $6,000 in something and it was abysmal. And so, don't be shy. Tell us what your epic failure was in your marketing of your book.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story and name names. How about that? In the business valuation book that Wiley published was actually written more for tax practitioners and lawyers and not so much business valuation people. Wiley marketed the book, to the extent they did at all, to business valuation professionals. And it had very little about business valuation there, so the book never sold. So we actually just recently got a reversion of the copyright, and we're putting out a second edition of that book with a different publisher now. But reliance on the publisher to pick the market. They didn't even pick the right market for the book, which virtually guaranteed its failure from a sales standpoint. If you're selling it to the people who don't want it, why do that? And I assumed that they knew more than they did. So,
and I wish I could say you're one of the few authors that has happened to, but I can't. When people read this book that we're building slowly through these podcasts, they're gonna see story after story of where they definitely did struggle. Authors definitely did struggle with that. So for our debut authors that are getting out there, don't make these mistakes. Make different ones. Make different mistakes.
Exactly.
Right. So what story do you like to tell about yourself that gets the most laughs from your target market?
There are three. The first is when I'm on a podcast that has video, I tell people I have a face for radio. Okay, that's first. The second thing is I almost always introduce myself as a recovering tax lawyer. And then often on airplanes, when someone sits next to me and then because I never talk to anybody I sit next to on an airplane. I don't know about you, but to me, I just don't. I have my earpiece. I'm listening to music. But sometimes people will ask me, hey, what do you do? And as an estate planner, used to tell people, I practice psychotherapy without a license. Because there's a lot of truth to that.
Yes, and beauticians.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, doing a hair therapy, if you will. But the third thing is a former law partner of mine used to refer to me as the repositor of the bizarre and arcane. Because in addition to my professional interests, in the fall, I am teaching the first semester of a 3-semester course on the history of the popes and the papacy. I'm also teaching in the same semester a 3-week short course on the history of the Platters and the Drifters, 2 music groups from the 1950s and 60s. So you never know with me. I was a pitching coach for 25 years. I mean, I'm all over the board. So he called me the repositor of the bizarre and arcane.
I think it's lovely. I think that's just lovely. Because authors are not single dimensional. That's one of the things, most human beings I've run into are multidimensional. Okay. And what's really sad is when it comes to marketing a book or whatever, is that if you're going to work with the artificial intelligence on social media and the search engines and stuff, you're almost forced into such a tight niche that until people get your newsletter or something, they might not know about all these other things that you are very good at doing, that you have a life outside of just the one book or the 9 books that you wrote. So tell us a little bit about what the biggest change is in yourself since you started marketing your own books.
Well, of course, it was eating a big piece of humble pie, and had to realize that I'm a lousy self-promoter. Okay, part of it is the guilt that was instilled in me, having been raised, and that was how when people come up as a kid, I was raised as a Southern gentleman, pursuant to and have to follow the code. The unwritten code of the Southern gentleman, which is you don't call attention to yourself, which of course is okay in personal settings, but when you're trying to sell a book, it causes cognitive dissonance, okay? Because
right.
you're like, this is something I was taught not to do,
right?
But here I've got to do it, and it never feels right, Janine. I wish I could get to a comfort point with it, but I've never gotten there.
Yep. No, I totally understand. I was raised under very similar situations. With the military background I had and training, it was staying in stealth mode. You didn't make noise, you didn't make waves. And it is something that I still struggle with. And people laugh because they're like, Janine, you're so extroverted, you're outgoing, you tell stories. And I'm like, yeah, it took work. And Paul, you're saying the same thing. It took work to get to that point where we could be comfortable just sharing stories, with other people. But well, knowing what you know, how about you give us your top 5 tips on what you would tell a debut author about selling their books, if you don't mind?
Number one, if you want anybody to buy your book, you got to market it yourself. Publishers don't market books. 2, work with the best publishing partners and resist signing with the first publisher who offers you a contract. I made that mistake. I won't name the publisher. I will be kind this time.
You're showing that Southern.
Yeah, I really shouldn't, but I'm going to. Don't give a second book to the publisher with whom you're working before the publisher gets the first book out. Because I made that mistake. And then they double-crossed me and only put out the electronic version of the second book. And I ultimately had to buy my copyrights to both books back. Even though the royalties for 5 years were zero, and the books go for 3 to 5 times annual gross royalties, so I should have paid zero for my copyright. I gave them $1,500 so they'd go away, so I get my copyrights back. Number 4, if the publisher isn't holding up their end of the bargain, don't be bashful about saying, I want my copyright back. Go get it. And if you got to pay, you got to pay. And number 5, where I am today, self-publishing is the way to go. If you've got the right self-publishing partner, and I have to tell you, I love mine. It's Kathy Mace at Publish, and they've put out my last 2 books. They are technically self-published, but she has a network of independent contractors that do every aspect: cover design, copy editing, developmental editing, proofreading, the whole thing. Those books are the best looking books. And like I said, I've put out books with Wiley, a national underwriter, American Lawyer Media. But those 2 books that are self-published books, okay, you think low quality stuff, best looking books I've ever put out. So, but once again, you got to pick the right helper, and I did. So I've got 3 more books in the works with Publish right now. So.
And then what is the primary thing that you think has been the biggest reward for you at becoming an author?
The biggest reward for me would probably be when the book actually goes live for sale, because, you went through all that, trouble writing the book, and then the editorial process, and then the book assembly process, and, the galley reviews, and, this and that. But all that is worth it when you click on, and all of a sudden your book's for sale on Amazon or on Barnes and Noble. It's like, hey, my book's for sale now. All that hard work for that one moment, you'd say, is it worth it? And the answer is yes, it is. And that's why I keep doing it. So.
Good for you. I'm glad that you do, because you have 9 books out. I know you're working on another one. And I just know that all that information that you have that is arcane and bizarre definitely does need to come out for us. Do you have any last comments that you wanted to make before we go today?
I think that to be a writer, to be a successful author, requires 2 things. It requires passion and discipline. If you have passion but lack discipline, your book never gets put down on a computer or on paper. On the other hand, if you have discipline but no passion, your subject is never compelling enough to either write, or if you do write it, it'll be painful and nobody will read it. So when I tell people who say, gosh, you've written 9 books, I could never write a book, it's too big of a project, I say, stop. Commit yourself to writing 300 words a day, which is 1 page. Okay. If you write 300 words a day for a year, you got a 365-page book. And there you did it. You did it in 3-foot tosses, as opposed to trying to make a 20-foot toss. That ring toss from 20 feet is a hell of a lot harder than it is when you're standing 3 feet away, especially when you're 6'5" like I am. And practically could put the damn thing on the ring. So that's my tip. It's not rocket science to write a book, and it's not impossible to write a book, but it takes discipline and passion, and you have to have both. So
discipline and passion. Well, that's it. Paul has answered our questions, and then we got more information in store for you. If you want to check out his latest work, please go and find his website. So where does somebody connect with you, Paul?
www.paulhoodservices.com.
Paul Hood Services.
And I have articles there, that links to many of the latest articles that I've written, the last 8 or 10 years. I have some white papers. There are links to buy the books and some other things, and my blog. So there you have it.
Authors are very good at having a lot of free stuff on their website. So just go dig around at the author website, which is paulhoodservices.com. And so there you have it. Today, we had Paul Hood as our spotlighted author. If you have an author or you know of an author that you would like us to spotlight, please visit our website, authorpodcasting.com, where you will find the 99 author project listed. We talk to all authors from all walks of life as we build out our book number 12, which is Advice from Authors to Authors. In 2023 is when that will go out. And this is Janine Bolon signing off with you today, and all of us here at the 8 Gates that produces the Janine Bolon Show. We wish you a wonderful week, and we encourage you to get your message, your story, or your knowledge out into the world and make it a better place, just like these authors that we're interviewing this year. We'll see you again next week. And until then, keep sharing what you know with others, keep shining that light that is you, and don't forget to go out today and do something for yourself that's just plain fun. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Janine Bolon Show. Be sure to subscribe to our show notes by going to thejaninebolonshow.com, where you'll find additional resources as well as the opportunity to sign up to receive our program in your email each week. Be sure to visit our sponsor at the8gates.com.